Hello, and in this video I'm building a railway overpass. So I wanted to do a smaller build like I've been doing in the past. This is sort of like a micro build, like the redeveloped street corner that I did a couple of weeks ago. I wanted to use more procedural objects in this build, which I did a lot. So as you can see now, I'm using Lost Gecko's retaining wall networks, which you can make into any shape and give them a slope and do that. And then I had the challenge to fill in the gap between the rail and the retaining wall. So I wasn't really sure what to do with this. First I tried to use roads. As you can see here, I'm trying to get it as close as I can and make it fit correctly. This worked okay-ish, and probably would have been what I would have done a couple months ago. I don't know, maybe 7 months ago, because before we had better tools to make these like sloped angles. But still, it doesn't look great, and as you can see, it just doesn't really work. I'm trying all these different techniques of trying to get it close and trying to make them fit together, stretching out the retaining wall network, trying to make it fit. And obviously this did work in part, so it's part of a larger it's part of the larger build to use these particular techniques. So before we get on to how I actually covered up the grass area, I'm just trying to make the actual bridge, give it a nice facade on the front. Trying to use some different objects. As you can see there, I tried to use the procedural objects mod and turn some props I had into a procedural object. I couldn't at this current time because the procedural objects mod was broken, which was a bit disheartening because I was trying to build this and it broke, and I really needed procedural objects to work, to get it to work. So for the facade I just used some props I believe Sparks made, and I cover the metal facade, and it looks quite nice. It probably would have looked a bit better with some procedural objects, but as I said, when I built the actual facade, the procedural objects mod was broken. It is now fixed, so it's all good now. So here's the prop. It's just like a concrete wall. I use the prop line tool, then I move it to a flat area to get it perfectly straight, copy it over, and then just simply paste it as I go down. And it didn't really fit on there because I didn't draw it perfectly straight, so I simply highlighted it with the move it tool, moved them to the correct-ish location, as close as I could. And I simply copy it and stick it on the other side. It obviously wasn't long enough because one side is sort of shorter than the other, the way that the bridge curves. So just copy it over. As you can see, it looks okay. It's passable, definitely passable. Now I create the middle section, which is just sort of like a retaining wall which holds the pillars. Originally I wanted to make it a bit smaller than it ended up being, but that's because of the procedural objects mod. I was trying to reshape Sparks' prop decal, asphalt decal things, but I couldn't, so I had to make it fit the size of that, which is okay. Just made it a tiny bit bigger. I ended up just using these random pillars, which I thought looked okay and nice. They fit in the sort of 90s era that I would imagine this bridge would have been built. 90s, 2000s, that era. So you can see I'm placing down the procedural. I'm placing down proper asphalt, and it doesn't really fit, so I'm reshaping the box to fit the proper asphalt. So here I'm trying to work out what I'm going to possibly do with these sides. a lot has been cut. I've left a bit in where I'm just looking around, trying to work out what the hell I'm going to do. How I'm going to create it. So, here I am. One half is already done, because I did it beforehand. And I thought I would try and work it out beforehand before I end up doing the other side. So, in between doing each side, I just covered the top of the bridge in a procedural object and used Sparks's ploppable prop things. They're like ploppable asphalt, but they are props basically, so you can just reshape them into any size you want, because the procedural objects mod was working when I after 2 days it was fixed, and I managed to do what I needed to do with it, which is very nice. The procedural objects mod can be difficult to work with. It does take a lot of learning. I still am not really 100% sure how to do everything. It is a very powerful mod, and it allows you to do some crazy things. So as you can see here, I originally started with these surface props by Dikaza, but they're not really the same color as the ground. Now the reason I did this was because I found that Ronix's ploppable asphalt grass, if you tilted the node away from like the original plane, the grass became black and it didn't look realistic at all. This looked much more realistic than it did. But then I worked out that, well, then I remembered, then you can rotate props. So instead of rotating individual nodes, I ended up rotating the actual whole prop so it was the correct orientation, and then I would manipulate each individual vertices to try and get it as close as I possibly could. So I ended up leaving the underside because I thought I was going to end up with some gaps, which then this green would have filled in. I did have a couple places where there were some gaps, but in the end I probably didn't need the underlayer. But I would know for next time, and you know as well that now all you need to use is the ploppable asphalt plus grass, and then just rotate them just enough to get it looking a smooth transition. Don't rotate too far or change a node too much, because it can mess with the way that the grass looks. This is by far the best solution I found to making a sort of grassy bank overpass. You could do this with any other ploppable asphalt plus. So you could use the gravel, or you could use the pavement, or the ruin texture. So pretty much this is just me doing each individual ploppable asphalt plus grass. Now the nodes are messed up for some reason. Each node uses the other side, so I'm not really sure why, but you can imagine that if it's square, the one on the top left would control the bottom right. No idea why, but that's sort of how it works. You just have to play around with the nodes to work out which node controls which vertices, and you can get some quite nice looking things. There you can see is the first part where I went too far with the node or the vertice and it went black. You saw it for a split second, but you could see it just didn't really look very good at all. I ended up trying to cover the top parts with just some normal ploppable asphalt grass on top of here to cover up some of the lumps and bumps that weren't fading. And then also using foliage. A lot of foliage, cover up all the mistakes you've made, and it makes it look a lot better. I ended up using way too much foliage in the start, so I tweaked it and used less and less as I could, but I needed a certain amount because of the way that it meets, like these grass panels meet the actual terrain, it can look strange, and the best way to hide that is with foliage, with bushes, stuff like that. I tried to use as low bushes as I could on the actual slopes, because I would imagine that they wouldn't use trees necessarily right next to the railway on this overpass, but they could use bushes and shrubs with quite deep roots to try and hold the earth together. So there's not really much more to talk about. I do a lot more foliage in this video, but I don't go the whole hog. I didn't record me placing down all the roads and dirt decals and other decals, because it honestly took way too long to do that. It would have probably been 4 hours of just placing down dirt decals and roads and tweaking individual bits just to get it to look right, and that's way too much to put in this video, so I'm going to cut it short and you'll see a bit more of the foliage and get a general gist of how I did it. So I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time.